Welcome to F360, Indiana Folklore and Folklife. In this lecture, we continue our conversation about material culture and discuss the related concepts of folk arts and traditional arts. In the same way that folklore has gone through various definitions, so is the idea of folk arts. I won't recount the long history here, but suffice it to say that early scholars of folk art collected the material culture of peasants and other ethnic groups, just as folklorists had collected their stories and songs. In the 20th century, art historians also latched onto the concept to refer to the aesthetically pleasing creations of untrained people. Once American folklorists redefined the folk as any group of people who share a common trait, and also began studying their artistic communication, some folklorists turned their attention to material forms of artistic communication in small groups, folk art and folk craft. First, their research often looked at things like regional variations of pottery, and baskets, and tools, the material evidence of what Warren Roberts called Otwal, or the old traditional way of life. They researched things such as the Annapolis pottery that was made down in Park County in the 1840s and 50s. If you've ever gone to Conner Prairie up in northern Indiana, that's the type of pottery that they make there that's patterned after that earlier form. My mentor, Warren Roberts, did a lot of research into pottery, but one of the areas he spent a lot of time researching were old ladder-back chairs, especially those made by the Turpin family, a tradition that continued through the 1960s. While we'll at times discuss older folk crafts in this class, like these, we're going to approach our discussion of folk arts as both the continuation of traditions, or what we will call traditional arts, but also the material forms of artistic communication in folk groups, what we'll call folk art. By calling an artistic act folk, we flag that we're going to look at it socially and in its cultural context. And then when we call something traditional, we basically signal that we're going to place it in a kind of genealogical or historical context. Many times, folk arts are traditional in that they're both grounded in the social life of a community, but they also have a pedigree. For example, fourth-generation rag rug maker Dean Neerman continues to weave using the same barn loom that her great-grandmother used. She explains, "This loom seen many miles of rugs and carpets come off of there." Growing up, Dee remembers when neighbors would bring rags to her mother to weave. She continues a family and community tradition that can be traced back to the Civil War era. So in that sense, her art is traditional. But it's also a folk craft, in that, like her mothers and grandmothers, she makes rugs for her local community in Jackson County, and each rug conforms to the aesthetics, values, standards, and appreciation of that community. Similarly, Jim Cooper made hoop nets to catch non-game fish from the Wabash River. His nets were both traditional and practical. Jim taught his commercial fishing tradition to his apprentice, Danny Kane, in an effort to encourage the continuation of net making in their community. In this way, the nets are traditional, but they're also rooted in the social life in southwestern Indiana, where fishermen use hoop nets to catch fish for area fish fries and gatherings. In 2018, Danny took on 2 of his own apprentices and instructed them the same way that Jim had taught him, carving needles and tying knots. We often think of these arts as old or rooted in the past, but in a very real way, traditional arts are continually being made new again. Traditional arts may be inspired by the past, but they're made in the present, and they often have hope that the tradition will continue into the future. Often this continuation is not as useful tools as in rugs and nets, but rather as demonstrations of cultural heritage. Generations of Allen Richards' family have lived in Brown County, where log houses and split-rail fences have remained part of the landscape, despite the fact that no one really needs to live in a log house or build rail fences for their farms anymore. Allen makes these worm fences as a way to continue a family tradition. Once his grandchildren were old enough, he recruited them to help him split rails for the local antique and tractor engine show in Nashville. Crowds gather to watch the Richards family do what for generations was commonplace across southern Indiana. But now it's special because it's seen as a heritage art. Alan had learned to split rails from his family as a way to make these old-style fences. His grandson, Porter, is especially talented at splitting out rails from straight-grained red and black oak trees. Each log is about 8 inches across and 8 or 9 feet long, and Alan starts to split the log with an axe. Once the log cracks, Porter uses a set of wedges and a splitting maul to cleanly split the length of log. They repeat this until the log is split into quarters. They can spend all day transforming a pile of logs into a length of fence. Of course, Alan is teaching his grandchildren more than just about how to make fences. He's teaching them how to work, and is forging a special bond with them through that work. Tradition bearers like Alan are important for the continuation of traditional knowledge and skills. He serves as an important bridge between the past and future generations. So the arts and crafts we are talking about are rooted in community life and often have a genealogy to them. People can talk about where they learned their craft and who or what inspired their work. In the next several videos, I will talk in more detail about these material forms of artistic communication in small groups and discuss their relationship to their communities and their tradition. In reality, people often use folk arts, traditional arts, and heritage arts interchangeably. In fact, I even do this. However, I wanted to flag these 3 connotations. Folk, referring to the social group of an artistic practice. Traditional, referring to the genealogy or the pedigree of a craft or expressive form or the history of it. And heritage, referring to that special cultural significance that a practice can take on. I think you'll see all 3 of these present in the videos that we'll watch next.